team here at EMEA. I've been a developer evangelist. I've been with Salesforce for 8 years. And now I lead the team, God help us. So really happy to have everyone here tonight. I was talking to some people earlier and saying that I've actually been waiting for this night for about 18 months. We've known about this coming for a while. It's been super exciting to see what the engineering team has been doing, and now we get to bring it to you tonight. So thank you all for coming. Thank you very much, London developers, for hosting this tonight and for collaborating with us. This is very much like we sort of brought the content to the developer group and said, we've got a great night that we can give you, just help us set it up, and they did, and so here we are. So thank you, everybody. I'd also like to thank all of the people at Salesforce that helped make this happen. We have the workplace services people, we have a bunch of volunteers that come and give up their evening to go and do this for us, and none of this would be possible without them. Every time you come here and meet at Salesforce, there's a small army of people that help make it happen because that's just how we roll at Salesforce. So thank you everybody from workplace services and from the other teams that are helping out. And then the last thing I want to say, even though she's not here tonight, Christie Fedora is our developer marketing director here in EMEA. She's done an amazing job putting together 3 events at the same time, on the same night, in 3 cities across Europe, here, Paris, and Munich. Check out the Twitter wall in the back at the next break so you can see what's being said about Lightning Web Components and those other areas, those other cities. With that, let's talk about Lightning Web Components. Oh wait, who else is here? So I'm super thrilled to be joined by some folks from Salesforce HQ, although Farhan technically lives in Toronto, but we won't hold that against him. So Trevor Bliss, his focus is testing and Lightning Web Components, and he's going to come and do a deep dive on testing and Lightning Web Components. Which is something that nobody else is going to get, and we're going to be recording it. So we're really excited to have that. Alex Papko, also a software engineer. His focus is around what happens when you tell your Lightning Web component to go be stored on Salesforce's servers. Okay, so basically what happens when we compile that, what happens when we validate that on the server side, and he's going to tell us a little bit about what happens today and where we want to go with that. And then as sort of a nice treat, as a general wrap-up, Farhan's going to talk about roadmap, just so where are we going with Lightning Web Components. Sound like fun? All right, great. As usual, we have a forward-looking statement. Make all your purchasing decisions based on only things that are currently generally available in the product. THEAD. This is the actual agenda as far as our hoped for timing. So if I get to 7 o'clock, someone bring out the shepherd's crook, pull me off, because honestly, most of the stuff I'm going to be talking about is actually recorded. It's the things that were in the keynote that we broadcast live last week. Nobody saw that, it seemed like, except for about 5 people, so great. You get to hear me talk about it. We'll then take our break. That's when we'll eat as well. We'll have some food at that point. Then we'll have Trevor talking about Chest and Lightning Web Components testing, Alex talking about Lightning Web Components compilation and verification, although that was a different word that he told me to use earlier, I think, so, but that's, you guys get it, I think. Farhan talked about roadmap, and then we want about 20 minutes for Q&A, because I'm expecting a lot of questions. Yeah? Does everyone come with at least one question tonight? All right, cool. I'm expecting great things. And then we still have half an hour for networking, and probably the pub afterward. So what are Lightning Web Components? Lightning Web Components are a new programming model for the Lightning Component framework. There were 3 core principles in mind when we built Lightning Web Components. First of all, we wanted to leverage web standards. And this is something that I talked about waiting 18 months for this night. I can't tell you how many times I've had to bite my tongue when I've been asked questions like, when can I use such and such ES6 feature in Lightning Components, right? Well, guess what? It's today. So standards. Interoperability with Aura is a huge thing. And Aura, of course, is the original Lightning component framework. That programming model will not go away. Your investment in Aura will not be wasted. However, for anything you want to build new, you can build that in Lightning Web Components and have it work in your Aura-based user interface. And then finally, we wanted amazing performance. And the nice thing is, when you go with standards and you're using the features that are native to the browser anyway, you don't have to do a lot of work to get good performance. It just happens anyway. And that's a little bit of what we're going to talk about in this introduction here. Because 2014, anyone recognize this hoodie from the launch of Lightning Component Framework? Yeah? So I decided to wear it just for the occasion. This is what web standards look like. We had ECMAScript 5 was pretty well established. We had event standard elements, rendering, and that was pretty much it. So if you wanted to build more features on top of that, there was a lot that you had to build into JavaScript. So any custom data services, if you wanted to build a component model. And we know also that this was the time of the proliferation of the JavaScript framework. So that was obviously one of the challenges. If I built a component with one framework, it would be interoperable with another. Who here saw a job listing in this time that was, I'm an Angular developer, right? So it was very much the thing that you would learn the framework and not the language, which meant that if you just wanted someone who knew JavaScript, it might be harder to find. And certainly if you wanted someone who needed to work in a certain proprietary framework that was built for an enterprise software company, it would be especially hard to find those resources. And then, of course, framework abstractions are slow. If those are built on JavaScript, they're going to run like JavaScript. And you can do things to optimize, but there's only so much you can do with that. Now, since that time, the web standards have taken off. And I remember sitting in the London Angular developer group in about 2014, and somebody came and presented on ECMAScript 6 and what the plans were for that. And I was blown away. But of course, at the time, that still meant that you had to transpile, there was Tracer, there was Babel, so you had to use something that would take your ECMAScript 6 code and transpile it into something the browser would actually understand. Now, the great news is that that's not the case anymore, right? So now if we look at the browser platform, what we have is a lot of these web standards, especially standards for ECMAScript 6, have now received just about universal adoption across browsers. And that means that if I want to create web components, I don't have to rely on a library. The browser will do it for me, for instance. And a number of other things, such as modules, event decorators, shadow DOM. So these are all features that you can use now in the browser natively. And what that means is your framework can be a lot more lightweight. Any specialized services, data services, and the actual custom UI components that you want to use, you might have to build those. But there's a lot more support to make that happen native in the browser itself. So of course, that's what we did with Lightning Components. With Lightning Web Components, we basically have three core things that we're providing to you as part of Lightning Web Components. The first is security, and of course that is locker service. Everyone's familiar with that. And the nice thing is it's pretty much the same locker service that we know and love. The next thing is Lightning Data Service. And so if you want to connect with the Salesforce servers, Lightning Data Service is the way to do that. Again, this is the same Lightning Data Service that we've been using in Aura components up until now. And finally, Lightning-based components. Now, does everyone know what I mean by Lightning-based components? What distinguishes a Lightning-based component from some of the other core Lightning components? It's anything with a Lightning namespace in it. So actually, you all have been using Lightning Web Components for about the last year, because as we've been rolling out more and more of these base components, we didn't write them in Aura, we wrote them in Lightning Web Components, actually. And who here has felt like they've noticed an improvement in the performance of Lightning experience, let's say over the last year. And that's not a coincidence, because more and more of the user interface in Lightning experience has been built with Lightning Web Components, actually. So, all right. So, obviously, lots of great benefits, more standards, fewer proprietary things, common component model. When you build and you learn how to build Lightning Web Components, you're actually mostly learning JavaScript with a few things that are implemented that are Salesforce specific. It's hopefully going to be a lot easier to find developers who know those stuff, and of course, better performance, right? And as far as interoperability goes, the nice thing is that the Lightning Component Framework doesn't go away. It's the same Lightning Component Framework. We just now have two different ways to actually implement the component itself. Or components, you can still go and build a new one today. When we go GA with Lightning Web Components, that doesn't change. But if you want to build any net new components, you can of course start with a Lightning Web Component instead, and you'll benefit from all of the features that we just talked about. All right. So there we go. Game-changing web standards, performance, coexistence. This would be the time where, there we go. So I do have a slide of resources here. Anyone wants to take a quick picture. There's a huge amount of content that we've been producing over the last year to make sure that we wouldn't just go live and you'd sort of wonder what to do, but we would go live and you would have lots of ways to learn this, whether you prefer videos. We just launched the video gallery the other day. Whether you prefer using Trailhead, whether you prefer sample apps, we have lots of different ways for you to learn the Lightning Web Component programming model. All right. So with that, let's go and jump to a demo. It's going to be, oh, you know what? I didn't put this on.
It's okay, I sorted it.
Is it coming in?
Yeah, that's fine.
So let me just quickly put on this mic. Is it on?
It is now, yeah.
Okay, so, cool. Now, first of all, who here has used any of the sample apps today? So there's the Dream House sample app. There are a few other ones as well. With the launch of Lightning Web Components, we added two new sample apps. One is the Recipes app, and the other one is the e-bikes app. You can actually go to this website directly using trailhead.salesforce.com/sample gallery. No one built a tab for this when we launched it. That's going to be coming very soon. But do go and check that out, and it is in the list of resources that we saw. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Recipes app, because this is a really nice way to just learn common standard features that you might want to use with Lightning Web Components. Each of the components in here is meant to be about 30 lines of code or less, and it's meant to encapsulate one particular thing that you would want to do, for instance, connecting or invoking an Apex class. These are also available in open source repos if you just want to clone the repo and launch your own Scratch org with the app in it. You can do it very, very easily, very quickly. And that's github.com/trailheadapps if you want to take a look at that. So this is the Recipes app. And just to start really quickly, I want to go through a couple of Hello World components. We'll check on time at that point again, because I want to make sure I give plenty of time for everybody else. Just to sort of give you an introduction to what it looks like to use a component and some syntax. So this is a component. Now, a Lightning Web Component is again comprised of a bundle of files. In the case of the Lightning Web Component, however, there's one required file, and that's the JavaScript. On top of that, if you need an HTML template, CSS, if you're going to use it in App Builder, there are other files you might need to use. There will also be a metadata XML file, but that's pretty much it. You need a metadata XML file and JavaScript, and you're good to go. So you can see if you look at this that we're using some just pretty standard JavaScript features. So this is the ES6 import functionality, which signals that we're using ES6 modules. We have an export statement, again, just showing that we're using modules. And we're using standard JavaScript class syntax, which is really just a way to package up the prototypical inheritance model of JavaScript. So it's kind of syntactic sugar around what's actually a fairly complex way to block and tackle inheritance if you have to do it manually. And then we can see that we're setting property here. So properties by default are private. If you want it to be available as part of the contract of the API of this component, you have to make it public, and I'll show you how to do that in a second. And as far as the HTML, we're using the HTML template tag. Again, one of the features of ES6. ES6 and ECMAScript 6, everyone's familiar with those being interchangeable, just to make sure, check your acronyms. And then you can see I'm using a base component like card, and we have a binding. And one important thing to realize is that in binding web components, it's not using two-way data binding anymore, we use one-way data binding. So if you need to bind, or if you need to modify the state of your component because of a change in the UI, how do you do that? So this is pretty much the same component with only one added feature, which is an input here. And what you notice is, again, we have binding, but here we have an on-change event handler. And so if you do want to update the state of your component from a change in the UI, you write the event handler down. And what does that look like? There we go. So handle change is my event handler, and it's pretty standard. We're just taking target.value and assigning it to that greeting property. But the greeting property has something that is a little bit different as well, and that's this, it's called a decorator. Decorators are also part of the ES6 standard. And it's basically a way of declaratively invoking a function. Is probably the best way to put it. And so what happens with the track decorator is that this is still private, but we are going to observe the value of this property, and if it changes or if it mutates, we will update the DOM. And so this particular component is also in my UI over here, and I'm just going to put this down. There we go. So as I change the value in the field, of course, it's going to go and update the state of the component. Good? All right. So how do I invoke Apex? Obviously, Apex is our programming language. It's a way of doing custom logic on the server. So this is an example of a few components that are using Apex in different ways. And I'm just going to focus on that first one there. You can see that all that it's doing is retrieving a list of contacts. And let's go see what it takes. Let's go see what it takes to turn that on, or to make that work. There we go. So, actually starting at the top on line 2, if you sort of still ignore my GoToMeeting little control there, you can see that we're doing an import again. And in this case, the import path is at Salesforce/Apex. So there's no more funny syntax to go and try and tell your component what is the Apex class. It's just standard import syntax. So we surface that Apex class as a stub that you can import just like any other JavaScript module. And then we're going to import it as getContactList. And notice we have another decorator. It's called appWire. And with appWire, we call getContactList. So that's an Apex method. And the way that the decorator works is that the result of the decorator just gets passed into the declared property after that. So one line of code, I retrieved a list of contacts from server. And then the actual template itself, you can see that we're using an iterator attribute in the actual component. Contacts.data, so contacts, because it's wired, has a sort of a wrapper around it. So whatever that thing gets returned, .data will be the payload. We iterate over that for each of those. We have a contact, and then we actually see the contact information in the list here. Okay? Excellent. No, there's a bunch of different imports. So there's several things that are at Salesforce. There are a few of the things that are actually the UI API. And if you have your own custom module, presumably you'd be able to do that as well. But I need to double check on that. I think as a static resource, you would still be importing it as a static resource, though. Yeah.
Policy parameters, of course,
Yes, you can. And I wanted to save questions for the end. Yeah. So we're going to have 20 minutes for Q&A. Store those questions, come back to them, we will answer them all, but I want to make sure we get to the more important content, which is Trevor and Alex. So, cool. But yes, you can definitely pass parameters, and what that would look like, I won't type it, but essentially you have a second parameter that you would pass into AppWire that would be an object literal in your JavaScript, for anybody who wants to know. Okay. So what's next? Let's take a look at an actual record form. Now in this case, we have a couple more properties of our JavaScript class, and we have them decorated with something that is at API. Now remember I talked about properties are private by default. At API is the way that you make them public. So in other words, to define the API contact of your components, at API is the way to do it. Anything that is at API or at track is also called a reactive property. And that's the capability for the changes to be then reflected in to repaint the DOM when that occurs. Okay? So at API is going to be reactive, at track is going to be reactive. And what's interesting about this is that this is actually a component that we're going to use in App Builder. And we would use this on a record page. And I don't need to do anything else in code except declare record ID. And the framework will take care of the rest as far as retrieving it, as far as having the property populated with the data, and then being able to bind that to my template. So it's a very, very simple declarative way to use your data. Object API name is sort of a freebie. If you're using a binding that uses a record ID, you can also inspect object API name. There are a few exceptions to that I won't go into now. And then we can dynamically declare some fields. I'm not going to get to it tonight, but there are also some ways that you can define the fields based on your metadata and have them referentially checked on compilation so that you can't then go and change field API names later on when you use them here. I don't have that demo up today, but I can certainly talk about that with anyone during the break if you're interested. And just to show that really quickly, the nice thing is that because we're using this, and this actually then works with Lightning Data Service, that also means that it is going to do basic metadata validation checks. So for instance, my email address will be verified as something that at least structurally resembles an email address without having to write any validation additionally in my JavaScript code. All right. Let's see. And then lastly, just to show how we're using that in the template itself, we're using Lightning Record Form. We pass in that object API name, we pass in the record ID, we pass in the fields, and that form gets rendered and painted for us. And just to show that really quickly, if I go back here to contacts. So there is my my form there, and just to show that, if I go and edit, and let's say get rid of the @ sign and try and save, it's going to go ahead and do that validation for me. And I didn't have to write that myself. So it is 7 o'clock. 1 minute too. And I notoriously talk over my time, but I'm not going to do that tonight. So let's take a break. I think food is here. Yes? Food is here. And we'll come back and we'll have Trevor kick off and talk about Jess and my new web components testing.